Well, folks, I went for the big one, making a wooden ring. I knew it was going to be difficult. I knew it was going to take a lot more editing. What I hadn't allowed for, I hadn't done it for a long while. I was going to mess it up. And I got a stinking cold. Everything I touched broke. So this has been a hell of a video to produce. Hopefully I'll get it out before I've run past my schedule for the next week. But let's start putting it together. I'm nearly done. I'm going to catch up with the editing once I've finished the ring, but it's starting to look quite nice now. And I'll go through how I make it. All is good with the world. I have Maltesers. We're ready to go. I've never been able to do that. Have a quick look at my lathe. This is a really cheap Chinese jobby. I mean, it's got plastic gears, which is its biggest failing. Come on to why that's a failing with me anyway. You've got basic speed control, clockwise, anti-clockwise, an emergency stop, speed counter, a 3-part chuck, which is fine. It's okay. I wouldn't be machining parts for a car on this, I don't think. And again, I'm no specialist on these lathes. So basically you've got the control here for this direction, here for this direction. You've got an adjustable height for the bit here, and you can set an angle here as well. You can also turn this part so that you can cut an angle that way. Never needed to use that, and neither have I had to use the full length anywhere, so this is pretty much unused. It's fine. However, when I was first making copper rings on here and knew even less than what I know now, I had this happen. I had a bit dig into the copper and it just chewed it up. So this was the bit that was in the chuck, and this is where the bit dug into it. I keep this just to remind myself why you keep your fingers clear on one of these things. Even one of these things with plastic gears and not a whole lot of power makes you realise if it can do that to a copper pipe very quickly indeed, it can certainly do damage to your fingers and also your eyes. I mean, you have to remember there's little swaths of metal coming off everywhere, and you do have to think about that. The problem was that when I did this, because it has plastic gears, it just stripped one of the gears, so the low range speed gear has gone. And I keep threatening to go and buy the metal gears for it, but to be honest, I use it for pretty lightweight stuff, and I just can't justify going and buying metal gears of, I don't know, 80 to 100 pounds I think they are for the set, when actually it's doing what I need it to do right now. It came with a number of cutting bits. I'm not even sure that's the right word for these things. I, again, hardly use any of these, and I'm sure they're not very good quality anyway. I'm pretty sure if I was cutting anything harder than copper, I would start to find these run out of power fairly quickly as well. So that's it for my lathe. I mean, it's a pretty basic piece of kit. All this ring making you can make on I think they call them a watchmaker's lathe, a much smaller lathe than this, but the cost difference wasn't a lot. I can store this in my workshop, and I can do other things if I want. I've got a couple of other ideas I want to do, and I'll come on to those perhaps in a later video. Not only do these help you see when you're making a ring, they make you damned attractive to women too. So we start with a piece of copper piping. Bog standard copper piping, which I've cut with a hacksaw down to size. Actually, this piece has been through the lathe already, and so I can be certain that the end is 90 degrees perpendicular. So it's a perfect straight cut on this edge. If you cut the edge with a hacksaw, then the first thing you need to do is cut an absolutely straight line on the end with the lathe. I've got that already. I can test that by popping it in the lathe. By the way, anyone who's really comfortable with lathes, tell me if I'm going wrong here. I've got no idea what I'm doing with this thing. I'd be happy to get any sort of comments. So what I can do is I can put the edge on here and I can just turn it by hand, and you can see on here that that is a perfectly straight edge. It's not a very clean edge, so we might just clean that up first. So the first thing we're going to do is get a ring from the copper. I'm just going to take that thickness for now. I tend to make the rings slightly thicker than I'm going to want them, because I can always take them down. I can't add on to them. Even once they've got the wood on them, you can narrow them down. So I tend to make them quite thick to start with, and then thin them down once the wood's on. It also makes them easier to handle. So I'm going to go with about that. You can see from the inside of the ring, I can't show you without moving the camera, but inside the ring you can see that there's a ring starting to form as I'm coming through. So now I'm going to just slow it right down, because I want this to break off very slowly. It's just about to go, and there it goes. I'm not going to pick it up yet, it's going to be hot. Fallen for that one before. So I'm going to put a mandrel in. A mandrel is a device that allows you to put the ring on it. Let's get the ring. And place it on it. Now at the moment the ring is too small to fit on there, but the size of ring that I want to make needs to go up these sizes. So what I'll do is I'll get it onto here and I'll expand it. Then I'll move it up another one, expand it, move it up another one and expand it. What you have to watch with the mandrel is it's in thirds, and if you're not careful you end up with an almost triangular ring. You know, but it stretches to that shape. So as you stretch it you have to keep turning it. And then what I tend to do is put it on a sizing ring. You can buy a sizing ring which is sort of like a cylinder, I'll show you in a sec, and knock it down with a hammer to keep it round. So what I tend to do is do the stretching on here, but then knock it down onto a sizing ring to make sure it's perfectly circular. The other thing I've noticed is that usually you get one side slightly larger than the other because of the shape of the sizing ring. So sometimes I say to people, if they put it on one way it will be a bit tight, and put it on the other it will fit perfectly. So that's another thing to consider. But that's our ring. There's one more thing we need to do to this before we stretch it, and that's to anneal it, and I'll show you how I do that. And typically I'd use a blowtorch for this, but I can't find it at the moment. I've got a feeling it might be in France. So what I'm going to do is do it on my gas cooker. It's not quite as good as a blowtorch, but it does the job. So the purpose of annealing is to allow the metal to stretch. If we just stretch this copper pipe, it's going to generate weak points. And what we need to do is get a jug of ice cold water. We need to heat the ring up as hot as we can get it on this gas ring, and drop it into the ice cold water quickly. And that sudden heat changes the structure of the metal to allow it to stretch better without breaking. If you forget to do this, you may get away with it, or you may crack the copper when you try stretching it. Either way, it's probably not good to put it under that stress. So I'll just heat this up as much as I can in a gas ring. As I say, a blowtorch is much better for this, but this will do the job. We're going to lose that lovely shiny copper look. So that's pretty hot now, that's getting on for red hot. And we're going to drop it in there pretty quick and just let it cool. It'll be cool by now. That's the annealing process, it's that simple. So the annealing process is complete. We can see some colour changes on here where it's heated up and cooled down suddenly. It's lost its shiny copper look when it came off the lathe, but now it will stretch easier and it will stretch more reliably. So I'm going to pop the mandrel into the chuck. These mandrels aren't hugely expensive. They can take a while to come though. They normally come from China, so they're not hugely expensive. I've got two sizes. This is the larger one. I'm hoping that I'm going to get away with the first stretch on the small one here. I may have to go on to the small one first to start it stretching. No, we're going to get away with that. So that's as far as it will go at the moment. I'm going to stretch it out. I'm sure these mandrels weren't designed for stretching, and I'm sure there's much better ways, and I'm sure there'll be some jewelers on here that will say, oh yes, we use a hydraulic press and, you know, etc, etc, stretcher. But, you know, I'm not buying big amounts of tools for this. This is something I do as a hobby on the side. Nobody pays me for these bloody rings either. So I'm just stretching that. It's about as far as I can go. It's actually slipping in the chuck. And if I take it off now, you'll probably be able to see that it's got picked up that sort of triangular shape. Well, you might not be able to see it, or you might be able to see it, but it's not, certainly not round anymore, where it's picked up the shape of that sort of semi-triangular shape of the mandrel. But we'll keep going. And then as we get nearer to the size we want, so there we go, just about get it onto the next lip of the mandrel. There we go. And we'll start stretching that again. I tend to turn the chuck, it's easier to lock the key. Oh, that's good exercise. We'll give it a little turn, a third of a turn, not even a third, and then we're round to the other side and we'll start pulling it out the other way a bit so it's not picking up that triangle. So we're nearly there with the resizing. Basically I've worked my way up the mandrel, stretching as I go. You can see that this side is slightly larger than this side, which doesn't quite fit on as easily. And actually that works quite well, because when somebody puts it on their finger they can choose which way fits best for them. I've also got a sizing tool here. I need to be just slightly bigger than a Y, and that's where I am on Y1/2 here. And again, if I put it the other way round, I can get the bloody thing off now. If I put it the other way round, I don't even get down to a Y. So I need to just stretch this side slightly more, and I'm going to do that by knocking it down onto the sizing tool. I'm doing here very slow speed. I'm going along the ring. I don't want to take much off because I haven't got, now I've stretched it especially, I haven't got a whole lot of copper to be playing with, and the ring when it hasn't got the rest of the wood on it isn't very strong. But you'll see by going round it like this you can see whether it's flat or not, and what I'm trying to do is take it down to as flat as I can without taking too much of the actual metal away. So I'll go a little bit more than this. I don't want to go too fast until I've pretty much got the ring flat. And that's pretty much flat. You can see there's still a couple of little indents there, but then they're pretty minor. And the reason I don't want to go too far is the ring is really quite weak now. I've stretched it. It's a lot thinner than the copper pipe was. And until I actually get the wood on there, it's not got a whole lot of strength. I also can't tighten the mandrel too much, otherwise I bend the ring out of circular again. So the next stage for this, give it a really good clean, and then we'll get the wood on, and I'll show you how to do that. So here I've got some veneer I bought. This is rosewood. I probably haven't chosen the best background for this because it doesn't show it quite as nicely. And this is a veneer I bought online. It's not hugely expensive. and you can see on this edge I've already cut some. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a strip not much wider than the ring. I will make it slightly wider than the ring so that I don't have to get it absolutely straight when I wrap it. I'm going to make it much bigger than I need it to be, because again you can always take it down on the lathe, but you can't add to it quite so easily. So what I'm going to do is take this strip, cut this strip, and then I'm going to soak it in water. It should really be warm water. If you make it too hot, I found you lose a lot of the lovely colouring in this wood, so don't make it too hot. And obviously you pick your veneer, you don't go and pick an edge like this which will give you a wonky line on your ring. So I'm going to pick this bit here and put it in some warm water for a while just to soften it. If I try and bend this round the ring now, it's just going to crack the wood, and it will split, and then when it goes on the lathe I'll have a problem with that. So what I'm going to do is just wet it, and then I'll wrap it round the ring, wrap it tight, and let it dry in that ring. I'll show you what I do. I normally stick it in the oven for a little while, or I leave it out in the sunshine just to dry off, and it dries it into a tight curl which you can then put round the ring once it's dry. If you put it wet, obviously it's going to retain that water in the ring, which you don't want. Let's show you how I do that. The observant amongst you may have noticed that I'm actually on a different piece of the wood here. I'm starting from the other end, so what I'm checking for, just make sure there's no knots. There's a split there which I'm going to have to allow for. So I'm going to take this line here, take it back away a little bit further as well. Again, lots off. Better to have it long and have to cut a bit off. It's probably about 10 times more than we're going to need there. And I'm just going to try and straighten that line up a bit. It just makes it easier when wrapping around the ring. Now the trick with this is not to try and push too hard and do it in one go. It'll split where you put that score line anyway. You may have noticed this cut on my finger. I did that when I was a kid doing marquetry, so I tend to be just a little bit more careful with this now, having scarred myself for life with not one of these but one of these small scalpels. So that's the strip. I'm going to soak it. I'll give you a quick look at it soaking. So here's the wood strip that I cut earlier. The water's still quite hot actually, and you can see from the amount of yellow in the water how much colouring has come out of that rosewood. Still got a reasonable colour, but bear in mind it's wet at the moment, so it's going to be looking much darker. I have tried some of these spirit stains before, and that's quite nice. That's an antique mahogany, and that's the results you get from it. This puts the colour back in. One thing I have found though is that you have to be careful, because it's very easy to stain the surface but not the whole wood. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making layers of this. And if you're not careful, you end up with stripes, effectively the dark side and the light side. So you have to wet it so much with the stain that it actually goes right through the wood. Here you can see it hasn't gone through the wood. So if we wrap that on a ring and we hit this bit here, it's going to be a light patch, and you're going to get that patchy look. And that's pretty much a write-off of the ring, because you know you can't. Well, I guess you could use the lathe to take the wood off. So let's try and wrap this. I tend to use the copper pipe that I started with. Bear in mind this is slightly smaller than the ring because we've stretched the ring now. And if I can try and keep it all in shot, I wrap it. You can see the water coming out. The most difficult bit is the first bit where you've got to get that lip underneath the other one. And the last bit, because the last bit you've got to find a way of taping it down while it dries. So bear in mind we're not actually on the copper anymore. Let's try taking that out and make life easier for ourselves. So what I'm doing now is, while it's wet and pliable, I'm giving it a bend. You can see on the edges some of the strips are already coming off. So you know, it just shows you'd have no hope of doing this when the wood was dry. And what I do is I wrap it like that. If this flies off, you'll have to excuse my language, because I'll always swear. And then I wrap it with an elastic band, get it nice and tight. And then I pop that. If you want to hurry it up, you can pop it in the oven. I find that a bit extreme. What I tend to do is pop that out in the sun, and that will dry into a coil like that. And when you take the band off, it will stay as a coil. It won't be quite as tight as that, but it will at least be curved enough to wrap around the ring without splitting it. So here's the two veneer rolls that I coiled up when they were wet. You can see if I let go of them now, they're fairly well set into shape as they've dried. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to put a cut on this one so I get a straight edge. And then what I'm going to try and do is take away an edge which I'm going to put onto the ring. I'll show you how to do that in a second. So what I'm doing here is just trying to put a sliver, just trying to shave some pieces off here without splitting the wood too much, which is actually proving to be quite difficult. So just keep going here. What I'm going to do is I'm effectively going to glue that onto the ring with super glue like that, and then I'm going to start winding this around the ring. I'm just going to put a flat edge on there. Because I want the edge that's straight edge rather, not a flat edge. I want the edge that goes onto the ring not to be too thick, otherwise when the ring is coiled you're going to see that. So you want to try and make this edge sort of thinner, so that when the first roll of the wood comes round, you don't get a step in this bit here. I've never tried it where this veneer is quite thin. I've never tried it without cutting this off. Maybe it won't be visible at all, but my feeling is that this is worth doing. Don't worry too much about splits. What we're actually going to do is, as we're rolling this, we're going to sort of laden it with super glue so that it sort of forms one lump, which we can then put through the lathe. So what I've done here is I've glued the first part of the strip onto the ring here, and now that glue's holding it just enough to stop it from turning. And now what I'm doing is going round the ring, putting the band of wood onto the ring nice and tight, and the further we go the better it gets. And the ring, unfortunately, because I've not tightened it too much on the mandrel, because I don't want it to come off being circular, I don't want the mandrel to bend it wrongly, so the ring is slipping slightly, but we can deal with that because I'm still getting this on reasonably tight. So what I'm going to do now is just keep on going round, wrapping the wood over the copper ring. I am going to have to tighten that a bit, it's slipping far too much now. So let's just keep going. Again, I've put far too much wood on here. You can always take it off. You can add it later, actually. You can effectively put another layer on, but it's a lot more difficult. So what I'm doing here is getting the band of wood on, and then I'm going to put the elastic band onto here. What I'll probably do actually is just a little daub of glue in there to hold that tail end steady while I do this. I really don't want to glue my fingers to it, so keeping them well clear. And I think we'll put an elastic band on for good measure. Don't care if the elastic band sticks to the wood, the lathe will soon sort that out. There we go. So that's the copper band with the wood on it. So here it is when I've taken it off the lathe. You can see the brass ring in the middle there. This side is much closer, so I'm going to start by getting the glue down in this side. And then I'll glue this side, and then slowly I'll use the lathe to just take this back to the copper ring. So here's the ring as it came off the lathe from putting the wood in. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use this this is super thin, it's super glue basically, but it's super thin. And what I'm going to do is just soak it down through the wood. And you can see how quickly that soaks down. It sort of wicks it in because of the gap between the wood. And this effectively then fills that gap and hardens. And it sort of turns that sort of coil of veneer into a near solid piece of wood again. Something you have to look out for with this type of super glue is that it generates heat as it cures. And there's a few times I've come back to one of these and found it smoking, you know, really got very hot. It's not often, but it does occasionally get hot, just to warn you. And I think that's probably that this is proper super glue and not the toot you buy in B&Q. Now I've got to be careful now because it's pretty much soaked and I don't want to glue it to my finger. It's hot now to the touch, so that glue has actually heated up. I don't know if maybe that's still some moisture left in the wood that makes it do that. But we're giving it a right good soaking, and that will go down and that will make that coil of wood into an almost solid piece of wood. So this looks a real mess at the moment. That's glued to the wood there. It's hot, so the super glue has sort of had a reaction. It's still slightly tacky. I've got to be careful I don't glue my fingers to it. But you can see the ring in there, and you can see the wood around the outside. So what I'm going to try and do now, once this is fully dried, and really the trick is to leave this overnight, let it really harden, is get this on the lathe. I've got one side here that's much closer, so I'll put it on the lathe that way, and I'll take down this wood here with the lathe. Or I may even just take a Japanese saw and just saw it down roughly, just to get closer to the band in the middle there. Oh bollocks, I've glued two of my fingers together again. So here I'm basically very gently, because the glue hasn't fully hardened, I'm very gently taking the wood back to where the ring is. This is a slow process, very satisfying, but you need to go a bit gently with it, not tear big chunks. The other thing is not to hit your mandrel. Done that before. There we go. So I'm just going to have a quick look and see where I've got to with that. And as you can probably see, I'll try and move around a bit. We're getting close to the ring now. So we'll go a bit more gently. I might just pop this off. Let's just stop the lathe. Let's pop this off, and we can look down here and see how far we can go to get to the ring. And you can see the ring inside there. So we've got this much to take off yet. So we've got a little way to go. Then we'll turn it round. Once this side's nearly flat, we'll be able to get it back on, and we'll turn it round and we'll do the other side. Looks a bit dire at the moment. I mean, you know, you wouldn't want anyone to see this and think this is their ring at this point. Whoop. Not tight enough on the mandrel. See, I'm being very careful about getting it too tight on the mandrel, because if I tighten it now, I'm going to get that non-circular problem again. And so I'm having to go a bit gingerly here. So again, I'm just going to keep checking this, because I really don't want to, if I go beyond the ring, then I've effectively taken the wooden part of the ring that I want off. Oh, I've got a long way to go yet. So if we look at this now, I've effectively cut back till I'm almost at the copper ring on the inside there, on that side and that side. Something you have to be cautious of is that when it's turning, if it's turning this way against the lathe, it's much easier for it to pick up that end piece. So given the preference, you should turn in one direction, and then the chances of it picking up that end piece is much less. Now that this has come down a bit, I'm going to give it another quick soak in super glue, very thin super glue, to just fill these gaps and make sure that it's fully sealed. If it's not, then we'll get a tiny, when we're turning it, we'll get a tiny little shard pop up, and that means you've got to keep going, and then you get another shard pop up, and eventually you go down till you've got no ring left. So I'm going to give that just another quick soak in super glue. Right, so I've taken that back, and the keen-eyed among you will notice I've also given that a quick vacuum. So I've taken it back so that these join. There's not such an obvious join here. Now if you look here, there's a little bit of super glue, but there's no need to worry about that, because actually we're going to be sanding this to within an inch of its life anyway. So I'm going to put this on the sander now and just flatten off these edges, get these nice and flat, and there, and then I'll put it back in here. I'll whiz it round a bit, and I'll just put some sandpaper on here just to check that we've got the right finish on here. I would say that's almost the right proportions. We can probably take that down a little bit more yet, down this way a little bit more, and as we sand it and put rounded edges on here, that'll happen naturally anyway. So what I'm doing here is trying to get a more rounded edge on here. It's quite tricky. I'm using a Dremel, and I've mounted the ring in the chuck. You have to be very careful how much pressure you put on with the chuck here, because it's very easy to squash the ring. And what I'm doing is taking an angle, probably better from above actually, like that, and I'm taking both these edges back. The Dremel's a bit harsh for this, and I've found that it's very easy to go over the top with this. So I have to do it very gently first, and then I come back and I polish it. Polishing seems to be the better option. At the moment it looks a bit raw, but I'll show you roughly what I'm doing. Well, it would help if I put this on. So we don't need speed particularly here, we just need to keep it moving. And then with the Dremel, I'm putting an angle on that edge and on the other edge. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to do much. If you're not careful, you'll take the ring right back, and you'll make these edges very weak. They're horrible and sharp now. I'm going to change the tool in the Dremel and do a bit of polishing with it instead. Right, let's give that a go. Don't need to be going particularly fast here. We're going to be going very gently. I'm going to take the light and just put it right over the top so I can really see what I'm doing. And I'm going to slowly advance on the ring. I think probably it needs to go left very slightly. And you can see that starting to cut into the ring now. Now the other trick with this is to get the depth right. I think probably still need to go left very slightly, because we've got to get enough depth for the copper core to actually go in there, to get enough of a bite to stay in there, but not so far that we have to cut the ring back to pieces, to take the ring back too far to actually get the surface looking right. I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to change where it is that way. I'm just going to withdraw slightly and stop it and have a look and just see if that looks about right. Really, you should better get your fingernail in there at least. I think probably I need to get just a little bit deeper than that. It's a bit of a trial and error, this one. Ooh, we don't need to be going that fast. Steady on, Lathe. Let's just go a little bit deeper. And same again. Have another look. We're not far off there, but it feels a bit narrow for the gauge of wire, so I'm just going to take it in slightly deeper and then move it slightly left to right to make sure that I've got enough of a gap to get the wire in there. And I'd say that's about right. I might eat those words when I go to put the copper wire in. Stop that lathe from making its horrible buzzing noise. So for the inlay, I'm using copper, I believe it's transformer wire. It's important that it's copper. A lot of these are aluminium with a copper coloured coating, which means because you'll put it in, it'll look lovely, but as soon as you take the coating off, when you try and take this flat, you'll go to an aluminium colour, which is not what you want. There's a couple of tricks with this. The first is, obviously, if you turn a transformer out of this, it'd be one block of metal, it would just short out. So this has actually got insulator on it. So what you have to do is cut a piece off, and you have to run it through sandpaper to make sure that you've got all that insulating off. You can also put it in a flame, but I kind of think that melts it and makes it more difficult to get off. So the key thing is that you cut enough, obviously, to go round the ring. This is the trickiest part of making this ring, and the trickiest bit is actually, one, getting this to stick, so that when you put it through the lathe later on to get it flat, the whole lot doesn't just spring out, and you'll probably have that happen a few times. The other is where you make the join, you have to cut it at an angle. If you make a straight join, it's very visible. If you cut it at a very acute angle, you normally can't see the join. And again, that's very difficult, and the trick with that is to have some really good sharp wire snips. I'll show you what I use in a minute, but let's try and get this in. But before we do that, let's just run it round, just make sure that we're going to have plenty off it, so we can cut it about there, and then I'll show you how I take the insulation off. So here I'm just pulling the wire through some sandpaper to get rid of that insulating. The insulating itself's not a huge problem, but obviously if you glue the insulator in and then you take the top off the wire, it can effectively just fall out. So you want to be sure you're gluing the copper in and not the insulator. You can see when it's gone, it's not as shiny, it feels different. Generally speaking, patience is the answer with this. It's infuriating. You just think you've got this bloody piece of wire in. You do a couple of turns on the lathe and the whole lot comes springing back out. You can see little shards of insulating coming off there. So we're definitely getting there. I think that's probably it. So what we're going to do, we're going to snip an acute angle on there. We're going to glue it in. We're going to turn it round. And we're going to glue it right down bit by bit. So we're going to leave that end loose. We're going to go round and glue the body round and leave the two ends loose, and then we'll push them together, cut them and glue them down together. So that's generally the best way I've found to do it. So you start somewhere away from the, let me get this in frame. you start away from the joint. You glue here, but you glue where my thumb is, but not this bit. You leave that freestanding, and you glue all the way round to about here, and then you join up these two last bits once the glue has hardened here. Now in the past I've used super glue on this as well, but this time I'm going to have a go with an epoxy, so araldite type glue, and I'm just going to get this bit in really sturdy, because this was the problem last time. Every time I tried to join it up, I pushed down here and it popped it off the bottom. So let's have a go with an araldite type glue. Don't forget, anything that gets messy around here we can take off with the lathe once it's hardened. Trick here is to go really gently. I mean, I'm taking a hair breadth off each time, but pretty certain this is going to come flying out. That's better than I thought, actually. The gap is reducing as I'm getting down further and further. Possible other problem is that this might be too high, it might be standing too proud, and consequently I'll not get a consistent thickness of band. But let's give it a try and just keep going and see how it goes. And there's the band popped out. That's exactly as I thought would happen. So as you can see what happened there, I felt that would happen. So the only option now is to take the ring back to flat, clean out that groove again, and start again with the band. Well, it's been a little while, but I've finally made some progress on this. The earlier versions of this, so luckily I had lots and lots of wood. This is a bit thinner than I would like, really. So basically I've had a couple of goes at getting this band in, and each time it's messed up. I've had to take another layer off the wood, and it's really down to the last chance saloon here. As it happens, the last chance was just enough. I've got a joint here you can just about see, and I got the joint by gluing in one go rather than in bits. I also put an edge on it, and then I put it in the lathe and pushed the tool against it to hold it glued overnight, and that seemed to make a difference. So once the band was in, I've then gone along with the lathe and basically very gently taken the copper filament back down, so it's effectively at its widest point, so it now looks like it's part of the copper in the back, but it's not. It's actually inlaid into the wood. This hasn't been polished in any way. This is just super glue on here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give it a light sanding and put a UV resin coating on here. I'm also going to put it in the lathe on the end here like this, and just sand these edges. When you take this edge down, it leaves a very sharp edge on here, and that makes it uncomfortable. So I have to sand a little edge onto these. As I say, I've got very little to play with here. This is the thinnest ring I've ever made, and I'm not sure it's going to stand up to the guy I'm making it for. My daughter's partner is he's a big tough guy in the RAF regiment. I'm not sure that this ring is going to stand up to that, but let's see anyway. So here I don't have to have this very solid in here, because I'm only using the lathe to turn it, so I just need it roughly straight. And what I'll do is take a piece of sandpaper, wet and dry paper, and I'm literally just going to hold it on that edge just to take that sharp edge off there. Lovely and smooth. Same on the other side. And again, that's just taking that sharp edge off. So now this is ready to have a quick sanding, and then we'll get the resin on and we're done. There's a few little blemishes here. I'm hoping they'll come out with the sanding. To sand these, I generally buy nail files with rough on one side, smooth on the other. This is pretty smooth now, so I'm going to just start with the smooth. The beauty of these, they're washable, you can reuse them, but also because they're flat, you kind of get a little bit of control on them. I'm having to keep checking because I am so near the edge of the ring here that I'm worried that I'm going to go back and just take that last piece of wood off there, which I really don't want to do. So I've got the ring where I want, and the colouring's about right. I have used a little bit of this spirit stain antique mahogany. It's come out a bit so you can actually see that. I've used a little bit of this just to get the colour back. When you soak the wood before you wrap it, it takes quite a bit of the colouring out, it takes a lot of the richness of the colour out. So I put a bit more colour in there. What I'm going to use now, the label's come off this, it's basically a UV resin which sets under UV light. I'm going to have to move quite quick today because I'm in my conservatory in bright sunshine, so this stuff's going to set quite quick. But if you're not under sunshine, what you can use with this is a nail polish UV light, and I've got one of those for when I want to work in the evenings, and in fact I'll probably put it under that for a while. This stuff sets so hard, apparently it's the same hardness as a sight hat. So once the ring is encapsulated in this, it really isn't going to let anything through. Now a lot of people dip the ring, but I found that when I dip them, I get a little point or a bit that's thicker than the rest. And once this stuff hardens, it's bloody difficult. Even the lathe, you risk tearing the ring apart if you try and get it off with the lathe. So you've kind of really got to do this properly. What I tend to do is here and this edge, overlap it slightly on the lathe so I can get to this edge, and really I think the edges are probably the bit that needs the most protection. So I do this coat and the edge, then I turn the ring round, do that and the other edge, and then I take the ring off and I do the inside coat as well, because it stops the copper from going green and tarnishing. So this doesn't need to be tight, it basically just needs to stop it from turning. And what I do with this is I tend to keep it turning, and then the coat goes on evenly. So you'll have to excuse me as I sort of go round and in and out and get in the way of the camera. I just leave it turning very slow, and that just distributes it evenly. So this stuff is thick when it goes on, and what I tend to do is put it on like that. I put it on really quite thick, and then I keep the ring turning. In fact, I'm going to turn the ring the other way. It's going to be easier to work on and show you at the same time. Now, as I say, this stuff will start hardening just because I'm in a conservatory with sunlight. So what I'm trying to do here is get a nice thick coat on, and the turning lathe should then make it even. And the other thing I want to do is to get the edges done. I'm not going to worry with the inside at the moment, so I'm going to put this on really quite thick. You can almost put a blob on and then move it round, and then you try and take the surface down as even as you can, and then leave it spinning, and that will set in the sunlight, in the UV. So I'm just going to leave that turning now for maybe half an hour in the sunshine, and that should make it hard enough. If it's not, I'll put the nail polish UV lights on it. They're a bit more powerful. So here it is again, but this time I've put the UV light off. See, I've got a bulb gone already. These are really cheap. I got this one off I think Amazon. I think it was about 10 or 12 quid. So I can't really complain when a bulb stops working after a few hours. No, I think it's probably longer than that. I've made a few rings with this. So that's it really. I'm going to leave it like that. When it's hardened under the UV, I'll then turn the ring round the other way, do the outside again to get an extra thick coat on the outside, and do the edge again, and then finally I'll take it off and manually do the inside of the ring. So here it is, the final ring. Gosh, it's been a marathon getting this one finished. The join isn't too bad. I mean, bear in mind we're in really good magnified mode here. We've got a join there that's gone down nice and flat. We've got a good finished surface, nice colour. It's a thin ring. It's the thinnest I've ever made one. So it wasn't by intention. It was because I had to keep having another go at that, getting that band into the middle. But it's come up nice. It's got the copper on the inside. I've got a couple of scratches in there, but it's not too bad. I was worried also if I took this down. I was so thin anyway now that if I had a go at getting out these last few scratches, I was going to take it down too thin. So God, look at my nails. They're disgusting. So that's it. I hope it's been worth waiting for. I've been having a real struggle as to why it's taken me so long, and it's really come down to the fact I haven't made one of these for quite a few years. I started making these at the beginning of COVID, and I'm just out of practice really. So I've got a couple of friends that have asked for one. I'm going to be making a few more, and I suspect I'll get it up to speed. At one point I was thinking of making these as a sort of retirement project, something nice to make and earn a little bit of money for. But really, the time it takes to make these, you just cannot make money on them. But they're nice things. They're very personal, and they've usually got a story behind them. So I hope it's been worth the wait, and hopefully next week we'll get back onto a normal schedule. I've really bit off more than I could chew with this video. Phew, we finally got there. Oh my goodness, this has been a long one. So I've learnt a couple of things from this. Not only does a video, for every hour you take filming something and recording something, there's probably 4 hours of editing. This video is probably the most complex one I've done. Not only that, I cocked it up, and it's been a bit of a learning process, and that's why I missed my deadline for getting one out every week. I now have a ring. It is finally there. It's finally done. Thank God. I hope it's worthwhile. If it has, please hit the like, subscribe, hit the alert. Anything you can to help would be great. So it's all adventure from here. Next week is the regatta, where I go sailing, and I'll try and cover a bit of that. I'm planning to spend a lot of the week down there in my mobile office so I can watch the goings on, take up the environment. Following that, I'm doing the North Coast 500 in Scotland. We're going to be driving around that. Going to get some lovely video of that. I'll cover that. And then I'm off to France. I'll take you to France with me. You'll see France. I'll cover how I get down there, some of the things about owning a house down there, the pros and cons, the French, love them or hate them. I really love the French now. It took me a little while. It took me a little while to understand them. So we should have some exciting content coming up. Stick with us, and we'll see you soon, hopefully. And I'm sorry about the delay of a week.